And it's 7:00, so we can get going. So, yeah, I'm going to call to order the March 23rd Planning Board meeting. And I guess I'll start with a roll call. Is that the correct starting? Awesome. Okay. Let's see. Mike Rowan.
Here. Sorry.
Carrie Lampson.
Here.
Tom Dorsey.
Here.
Jim Johnson. Can we get a thumb? Yeah, there you go.
Mute and mute. I don't know why the space bar works sometimes. But
I know. It does it for me too. Great. Thank you. Jonathan Clayton.
Here.
Miranda Stujanki.
Here.
And Prayag Patel.
Here.
And me, Natasha Edwards, I am here. So welcome, everyone. Let's start with the approval of minutes from February 23rd, 2021. Please. Anyway, anyone want to approve the minutes?
Approved.
Should we change the date on it? I didn't know how that.
Yeah,
mattered.
I'm looking at, that got me off guard there for a second because the agenda also has the wrong date on it as well. It's 2020 on there. But that's all right. Yeah, let's make them change to say 2021.
So yeah, I'll make a motion to approve if that gets changed.
Anyone want a second?
I'll second. The copy I have says 2021 on the actual minutes document.
Oh, okay, great. I think it's just then on the agenda for tonight then.
Sorry, I'm still confused with the.
Spring is here. It's COVID.
All right. It feels like 2020 never ended, so that's probably why. Okay, let's move to our first zoning application, 2021-720. Oh, sorry, we need to do, we seconded.
Roll call.
Let's take roll.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mike Rowan. We got away from Mike. Tom Dorsey.
Yes.
Jim Johnson.
Yes.
Jonathan Clayton.
Yes.
Carrie Lampson.
Yes.
And Shayna, do I need to say Miranda and Prayag just for, or no?
Yeah.
And then myself, I approve. Okay. Let's move on to item number 3, zoning application 2021-726, mud text to change the text of the UDO to change the minimum overall development area to allow development of properties within that district that have less than 15 acres.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Chair. I'll be your guide this evening for these 3 items.
Oh, good.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I want to show you guys my staff report. And so this, as the chair said, this is zoning application 2020-726. It's a text amendment to reduce the minimum size of tracts of land that can be designated as the mixed-use zoning district. Currently, the mixed-use zoning district requires 15 acres or more of land to be designated as MUD, mixed-use district. This is the highest non-residential zoning district requirement that we have in the code. While the 15-acre minimum makes sense to a certain extent, it is a way to guarantee there's enough acreage for a proper mix of uses, which is the intent of the zoning district. But allowing smaller sites to take advantage of the mixed-use district would permit creative infill opportunities. The town also has a limited amount of vacant land, and very few parcels are 15 or more acres. As I mentioned before, all of our other non-residential zoning districts have a minimum, or almost all of our other non-residential zoning districts have a minimum overall development area of NA or 0. So the proposed text amendment is to change the 15 to NA. During the public hearing, concern was raised over the drastic decrease from 15 to 0, and it was suggested that maybe look at something greater than 0 or greater than NA. At this time, staff recommends replacing the minimum overall development area for the MUD district from 15 acres to NA, mainly because it will be more in line with other non-residential zoning districts that we have in the code. And we think that it would provide, staff thinks that it would provide, again, more flexibility to the mixed-use zoning district for creative opportunities that may present themselves in the future. Let me stop sharing. Happy to answer any questions that the board, planning board may have at this time.
Mr. Lansom has his hand raised.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. Let's start with Carrie then, and we'll go to Tom after that.
Thank you. Rob, just a couple of quick questions. Number one, I believe when we reviewed this with the town board and at the public hearing, Jay mentioned that there may be an alternative to simply changing the text in this particular requirement, and it was to make it somewhat conditional in some way so that we wouldn't have to state whether it was 3 acres, 5 acres, NA acres, or 15 acres. Can you go back over that other option where we would go to conditional zoning instead of making the change in this particular area? Or perhaps, Jay, you could review that again for me?
You're asking me to recall what I said a week ago. So I know that regarding private streets, I had made a comment that we could potentially look at another method, maybe our flexible design standards. I don't recall saying anything about this one, though. I'd have to go back and look at the minutes.
Well, it is a conditional zoning requirement to begin with. So in the event that we wouldn't change this, what options does a petitioner have to be reviewed with less than whatever the minimum is? Is there an option for them today, other than a text amendment, to bring a condition for this particular situation that would allow them to ask for 3, or for it to be not applicable in that instant, rather than a broad code change?
So our flexible design standards today, the way they're written, I'll give you an example. If this were an RVS zoning and you're building houses, you could modify the setbacks, minimum lot area, and a host of other things through our flexible design standards process. I guess in theory, you could add the MUD district to that, so that if there's a 3 acre or a 5 acre minimum lot size for that zoning district, that could be part of a zoning request to reduce the minimum lot size down to 1 acre or half an acre. Honestly, I think what's presented is cleaner because it does, as Rob said, it sort of matches up with the other zoning districts. At the end of the day, it's a conditional zoning district and it has to go through a zoning process no matter what. So if the town board, if staff, citizens don't like what's proposed, it's going to be denied anyway.
Understand, but in fairness to a petitioner, if the minimum requirement is 0, I can't expect the town board to say, I'm sorry, it's not 15, we're not approving this. When the code required only a minimum of 0 and they comply, what leverage does that give the town board or decision-making process that you would be able to exception the fact that they met that requirement, but you're not approving it?
Well, so meeting the basic zoning requirements for setbacks and lot area are just a very small part of evaluation of a, yeah. Rob, would you recall were the setbacks flexible in MUD? Because I think from our perspective, I'm picturing maybe a small lot in downtown that is ideal, that, the historic urban core district maybe is not a good fit. We don't really want to do B1. Perhaps they're proposing, ground level retail and office or residential above. From our perspective, this gives staff more tools in our toolbox to work with developers.
And again, if I'm just so that I'm clear, if we hadn't changed it and it was 15 as a minimum, the petitioner in that scenario you just described could still come in and get a conditional variance to not have it be 15, even though that's the minimum requirement?
No, that would require a text amendment as well. You would need to modify our flexible design standards to add
Okay.
lot area for the MUD zoning district.
Yeah. Right. And if I recall, one of the reasons this is happening is that we're looking to try to put the particular petitioner is also presenting to us a development that is adjacent to a MUD district zone. And I thought it was staff's proposal to make them consistent simply because the one is MUD today. Let's make this one the same. It could have easily been RVS had they not been contiguous.
That's correct. We really wanted the projects to flow together, and there's an existing entitlement on a portion of this property that was rezoned with that property in 2009. So it really does dovetail nicely. Okay.
And my last question, and I'm sorry, rest of the team, if we make this change, what happens to any redevelopment of a MUD district that may currently comply with 15 acre, but now might be able to do none in terms of space? If someone were redeveloping a currently zoned MUD development, especially if there was a retail area that only had minimal residential or other use process, what happens to all of those that are currently zoned in the MUD district today?
So Rob, what do we only have two properties in the entire town. So it would not create a nonconformity.
Right.
One of which is the one where this proposed project is going to be beside?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's one other in addition. So we'd be creating three if we approve the text amendment and the rezoning request.
Yeah. Yes. The other site was recently, the site plan was recently approved at Rice Road and Samuel Road.
Okay. Thank you.
You all reviewed that one.
Thanks, Gary. Tom.
So I may be repeating some of what was said here, but my question was, we go from 15 to 0. Someone brings in a development. Do we have the ability to look at that plan and say, this site that they're proposing is too small for this development, and we'd really feel better if it was 5 acres or 10 acres, whatever? How much flexibility we have, or have we lost that ability to opine?
Well, I think that I'll field that question. I think that that would be part of the conditional review, as this is a conditional zoning district. So that would be something that is under the purview of the planning board and the board of commissioners to say, no, we really think this is too small of a site. You're trying to fit a round peg in a square hole, something like that. But at this stage of the game, we would not have anything that is permitted to come in under 15 acres.
Yeah. So to have it though totally NA seems to throw a little bit of uncertainty on the backs of the applicant, and some possibility that the planning board or the town board might be accused of being arbitrary. Just throwing that out.
That is a possibility, I think. But if you consider our other non-residential zoning districts, including industrial, they currently are NA, as is B1 and B3, business highway. So we do have precedent for good development on smaller sites than 15 acres.
Thanks.
I have Mike Rowan.
Yeah. What would have been the original intent of it being at 15 acres?
I can take that one, Rob.
I was going to say, I don't know. I've tried to think about this myself, and I have some of my thoughts, but I'll let Jay start off.
So that district was expressly written for the Wingate Commons development at 485 and John Street. I believe the developer may have pinned it with a lot of staff and council feedback once it came in. It was originally 30 acres, and it was at some point down the road reduced to 15. But if you look at the direction the town is trending, where land is becoming more and more scarce, I think you're more likely to see mixed use zoned infill rather than 20 and 30 acre tracts. That's not to say that we wouldn't have a 20 or 30 acre development, but we're far more likely to have an acre or 2 acre site come in rather than 15 to 30 acres.
But why would you think because then that's somewhat more restrictive, right? So, I guess I'm trying to get my head around when it was originally done, why, okay, 30 acres, 15 acres. So obviously they were looking at larger scale for this type of development versus small scale.
Right.
Was it to protect the integrity of the town at that time, or?
I think, quite honestly, so if I had to take a quick stab at it, you had a developer that had a 50 acre site. They said, sure, make it 30 acre minimum. For I think they were really thinking about their particular project when it came in. But, I think Charlotte has their UMUD district, which is downtown Charlotte. In the future, as light rail comes through and we start looking at different zoning categories, I could see this mixed use district being used more frequently in the town with infill development. Look, if people are not comfortable with NA, we could always put a half acre minimum lot area on it if that makes people comfortable. At the end of the day, we still have parking standards, setbacks. We have other standards that they're going to make it difficult to do a project on 1/10 of an acre. Or
yeah, and that's my biggest hesitancy is, you're just giving up, like Tom said, you're giving up managing it. And so then you're turning to other pieces to help manage that whole process, it appears.
All right. Jim.
I'll throw my 2 cents in. I see this as kind of a win-win. I mean, we get more flexibility in our zoning. We probably inherited this original kind of assessment. We're evolving the UDO into Matthews at this point. It's sort of HUC with more restrictions, but that's good stuff. I mean, a little town having a little bit of mixed use here and there, especially anywhere near the downtown, is a positive for us. And it gives the developers who come in and look at this like, wow, we could do some different things in this land than maybe they would have thought otherwise. So to me, NA is better. It's not even trying to drive the boat. It's like, come in with a plan, throw it at us. You got to get conditional zoning. It's going to be something else. So it's got to go to this. So the town board has complete control. We have complete control. The planning board can say what it likes. So I don't see a downside. I think NA is better than trying to even specify a number, because then you're trying to pigeonhole them again. It's like, let them come up with an idea. But I do think this kind of zoning is good for the town, good for a small town.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? Jonathan?
Yeah, just what Jim said and what Jay brought up. Good point about the light rail coming in and using mixed use and lowering it down to not available to NA is, I'm fine with that, to be honest with you. So just, yeah, I don't want to pigeonhole anybody into their own design and what they may future. I don't want to hold this up for what the light rail may bring and how we want to develop moving forward in years to come. So I'm fine with NA.
Just to throw my 2 cents in, I think if we were going the opposite direction, I'd have definitely more concern. If we were trying to increase the amount of acreage that was required, that would be more of a concern, because I think infill makes more sense at this point in time due to what's out there. Jay, quick question. Are there any properties right now that are 15 plus acres outside of like the E&T that would even be available for that sort of mud district?
What comes to mind, the East John small area plan that I guess is about 5 years old now. It calls for mixed use in certain areas if you look at the build out scenarios. So they're definitely properties out there that could be developed at 15 acres, but it really whittles down the availability of that district as an option when we start talking to developers about what zoning category is appropriate for a given property.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from the board at this time? No? Would anyone like to make a motion? Jim?
I'll make.
You're on mute. You got muted.
All right, I got this.
Yeah, that bar doesn't work.
I got a bad space bar. I swear, this is not good.
Mine doesn't either.
Hang on. I'd like to make a motion to approve zoning motion 2020-726 for an administrative amendment to the Matthews UDO. The requested zoning action is consistent with the Matthews land use plan to provide additional applications of the mixed use district as a flexible zoning tool to promote quality mixed use development by reducing the minimum development size and to allow for smaller mixed use projects. It is reasonable because most other non-residential zoning districts have an overall minimum development size that is significantly less than 15 acres.
Thank you, Jim. Would anyone like to second?
I will.
Jonathan? Okay, so we have a second. I will start with Mike Rowan.
Yes.
Tom Dorsey.
Yes.
Jim Johnson.
Yes.
Jonathan Clayton.
Yes.
Carrie Lamson.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Okay, that's unanimous among the board. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on to zoning application 2021-727 Greylock Ridge Townhomes to change the zoning classification from R9 to MUD on those parcels located south of Marsh Road between East John Street and Tanktown Road, and being property known as the John R. Downs heirs property and further designated as tax parcels 215-042-12 and 19. Rob?
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. All right. As the chair mentioned, this is rezoning 2020-727 from R9 to MUD. In summary, the request is that the applicant proposes to change the zoning from R9 to MUD for the purpose of constructing 75 townhomes. True Homes is the applicant, and they shall provide 11 townhome units to be preserved as rental housing targeted to households with an income of up to 60% of the area median income. Some of the comments that were raised at the public hearing were that more open space should be provided. There were little to no amenities were provided to the neighborhood. It was, as previously mentioned in the last item, it's meant to be an extension of the future mixed-use project to the south. Price point of the workforce housing is about $1,100 for rent. Greylock Ridge Extension, the roadway, is funded by the NCDOT. Density was a concern, and a possible reduction of units was asked for. In response to these comments, the applicant has submitted a revised site plan showing an urban park, the entrance of the community, small increase in open space provided, and revised elevations to address concerns raised at the public hearing. The land use plan does not specifically make a recommendation for this site. However, it considers well-designed infill development such as RVS or other higher density mixed and multi-family uses where appropriate and compatible with the existing development. At this time, staff recommends that the planning board forward a favorable recommendation of zoning application 2020-727 change from R9 to MUD to the Board of Commissioners. And I'm going to go ahead and change tabs. Can everyone see the site plan?
Yes.
Okay. Just as a brief overview, this is an area where they're proposing a sort of a pocket park, urban park area. The only surface parking is for units that will not have garages. So they reduce the amount of surface parking. They're still in compliance with the parking regulations. But they, so that was the increase in open space. And then the units that are proposed to be for workforce housing have dots on them. And I'm going to stop sharing. And the applicant is here, Donna Cook and Keith Finn. If you have any questions for me or for them, I believe they have a presentation if we want to go through it.
Thank you, Rob. Tom?
Just a quick question. Do you know if the park is one that's proposed to be dedicated and owned by the town, or is it one that they would keep and manage, or is that whatever we want?
We don't have that designated right now. We could have that discussion with the applicant at this time.
Okay, just curious as to what their intent is.
Mm-hmm.
Let's Carrie, let's answer your question first, then we can go back to that.
All right, and it may be something that will be deferred to the petitioner. Rob, my question is about the target rental rate for the affordable or workforce housing. Do you know how that was calculated and why it's $1,100? Second part of that will be, in what other fees, what other expenses, you take a look at that income level, and they'll be hard pressed to stay below 30% if you include all expenses, utilities, and all of the cost of housing on top of an $1,100 rate. So it seems a bit high for me. I just was curious how it was derived and what else was considered at this point. And the second part of that question is, how large are these units that were set aside for this process?
Sure. I'm going to actually defer to the applicant for the answer to those questions, because they have done that research and can tell you the size of the units.
Thank you. Let's, if we can answer Carrie's question first, then we'll go back to Tom. Sorry about that, guys. But yes, please go ahead, Mr. Fenn.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. Donna Cook's online as well. We work together for True Homes. I'm on the land development side, and she kind of handles a lot of our planning and zoning components for our company. And with respect to this project, we can definitely speak to those 2 points. So the art center piece, we actually haven't looked at who would actually have ownership of that. I'm not sure that's really a major issue for us. We did want to provide it, even because there was a specific request for that. And there's a lot of intentionality there. There was an art piece as well. So it's a passive park, it's an art piece. I can tell you right now that the initial design indicates that we would have ownership through our HOA, and the HOA would maintain it. So, if the town wants to take it over and maintain it, that it would be an additional cost component as far as from a maintenance perspective. And again, we don't mind taking that on and incorporating that into our common open space and HOA. So definitely something that we can talk about. As far as the rental rate is actually set by, we have a housing partnership with, Donna, forgive me they changed their name, so I'm trying to remember their new name.
Right. It is Dream Key Partners. They're formerly known as the Charlotte Mecklenburg Housing Partnership.
Yeah, so they have committed to taking over all these 11 homes, if you will, and they're basing everything off a 60% AMI. So that's how they're setting that standard.
Right. So along with the income levels, the area median income, those income levels are established every year by the Housing and Urban Development, and then Mecklenburg County sets those area median incomes. Those are updated yearly. And then based on that area median income, rental rates are set based on the income and number of persons within the household. So those rates vary based on the income levels that they're targeting. In this case, it's up to 60% of that area median income.
I understand. How large are the units?
And the units, they are both the 2 and 3 story homes are approximately 1,200 square feet.
Number of bedrooms?
They're both 3 bedrooms.
Okay.
And I misspoke that the 2 story is 1,200, the 3 story is 1,300 square feet.
It's a little larger. The difference between the two, just to point out, is that the 3-story has a parking garage.
Understood. And again, I understand the process and the management. I will say this, the wording says up to 60%. Majority of our local town workforce does not make $78,000, which is the AMI for Matthews currently, 60% of which would be around $48,000. They're much lower than that. Standard police, educators, and so forth. That's the only reason for my comment about it seeming to be a bit on the high side if we're truly going to call it workforce housing. And if we're only targeting that the threshold will be at 60% and not potentially below that. So just wanted to make a comment. It seemed a bit high because this is just the rent. This is not the total cost of housing, which goes into that calculation to determine whether or not it stays, quote, affordable or below 30% of their total gross income. So thank you. I appreciate the answers.
No, thank you. And my only response to that would be that right now the rental market in Matthews is substantially higher for a 3-bedroom. So this actually does qualify for affordable housing and the affordable rental. And the other component is the HOA fees are not a burden onto the renter.
Great, thank you. That was actually my question, is how those HOA fees were going to affect that, but
Yep.
Thank you for answering. Any other questions from the board? Okay.
We do have a small presentation if you guys would like for us to go through that. It gives you a little bit more detail, a little more in depth, gives you some perspective, some elevations.
I'm fine with that if the rest of the board's okay with that. Yeah, okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure.
Donna,
Yes.
I have your presentation, but if you wanted to go through it and screen share instead of,
Okay.
if you wanted to run the show, that would be great, if that's fine.
Yeah,
Sure,
we can share it. That'll be fine.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Are you seeing that? Great, thank you.
All right. So here's our summary of request, obviously for the zoning application, changing from an R9 to an MUD to allow for single family attached housing. You can see a quick site plan rendering, colored rendering there. We're going to get into more depth on that one.
So here on this slide, we've got just the location of our proposed site and showing its proximity both to amenities in the surrounding area, the Matthews Sportsplex and downtown Matthews. The site is located so that it has convenient access to major thoroughfares and public transportation along John Street. And because of its location, the walkability of the residents within here to walk to those amenities is very high, as well as the proximity to the greenway. From a contextual perspective.
Yeah,
I don't think you're.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. The slides aren't advancing for us.
Oh,
Yeah, it's not still on the summary of request.
all right. That may be an internet connection.
Should we give it back to Jay and then we'll just tell him when to change? Or Rob? I don't see any movement, Donna. There you go. Perfect. Okay. So Donna, that's why you were speaking to this, because I couldn't see this. Okay. So as you can see, Lat Purser's property abuts ours. That's the 63-acre MUD that was previously rezoned back in 2010. And a corner of that parcel, actually that corner of our parcel, was included in his MUD, which is already MUD. It just has a different ownership from a parcel perspective, but it kind of gives a great segue, as Jay alluded to earlier, just to kind of encompass this whole section as MUD. And as Donna was referring to, is just the proximity and the tie-in is having that cut-through road. That Greylock Ridge extension is a great corridor to give you a phenomenal feel. We'll show you what that looks like as far as a cross-section with the street trees, the meandering pathways, etc. The CRC above, that's the Crestdale neighborhood. There was actually a report that Matthews had incorporated and adopted, and it recommends promoting a variety of housing types and mixed income development. So this is actually part and parcel to that reference back in 2011, that this is what they were looking for in this specific area. These are some of the changes that we've made since the last presentation to the council, the commissioners. Again, Rob pointed out some of the kind of the talking points that were mentioned, and we tried to address every single one of those, so we can kind of go through this really quickly. We converted one of the sidewalks into a meandering path, consistent with the greenway design. We've eliminated some of the excess parking to create additional landscape buffer and green space. We've created that urban park with that art feature and seating, kind of addressing that amenity feature component. And this is something that we've actually added. We've designated an area for native plantings and community wildlife, and we'll point that out in a moment. We've provided a cross-section of alley to demonstrate no conflicts within the drive aisles. There was a question about, where's the drive aisle versus where's the parking, which the relationship. So we have a cross-section to speak to that. The elevations themselves, which is, we're showing the 2-story and the 3-story. We have a softer color palette. And the colors are representative and will vary by building. So we don't have just kind of a monochrome or a mono color scheme going across the board. Use mix of exterior materials to better individualize the townhome. So just speaking to that, so these homes are for sale, they're retail. We've allocated 11 of these to the rental component. So we will not be selling those to the retail market, and we will not be managing those as well. Just want to be very clear about the differentiating factors there. We've added varying porch sizes to add visual interest and diversity. Again, that's a very visual component. We've added a 3D rendering just to illustrate and articulation the porch and the roof lines. Again, this rendering is just to give you some perspective so you can understand exactly what it is that we're proposing. And here's the site plan. Again, we have a closer up view here, so it's a little better to see it in context. In the upper right-hand corner, you have that native plan demonstration that we were referring to. So that'll be a dedicated space just for that area. To the southeast, you'll have the proposed tree save area. Our intention is not to really touch that area and just keep it as a tree save area. Again, adding to the green space. As far as the layout and the component, I think it's important to point out that the right-of-way, the future Greylock Ridge Road, that's already locked in place. That is already dividing our parcel we're flanking both sides of that. So we're kind of restricted to dimensionally where we can go north of this and south of this. As to the actual design of the road, it's a conjecture here. We kind of feel that this is where DOT would go, but at the end of the day, DOT dictates this design. And I'm going to show you a little bit on the cross section where we have some parallel parking that the town of Matthews would like to see, and we're more than willing to have those placed in there. But again, DOT has final say on that. those parking spots are not included in our calculations. So if DOT, for whatever reason, says, yeah, that's not going to happen, we still meet the parking requirements internally to our program. You can see the numbered units in white with the black letters. Those are the 11 designated affordable rental homes. The remaining are the retail, and we have the remaining are all 3-story, which each of them again has a parking garage. They're all 3-bedroom. The sizes, the square footage, as Donna mentioned earlier, is pretty consistent. An additional 100 square feet on the third floor unit. And to the bottom left quadrant, you'll see that half acre that's reserved for future development. That's the piece that I was referring to in the previous slide that was already designated within the MUD of the southern tract of land. So that's already in that zoning. And to the north of that, you'll see the open space in the urban park. Again, that entire quadrant is dedicated just to that area or to that use. One of the things that the town really was asking for is the connectivity of Selma Burke. So we did punch that through our parcel and then created connectivity to the MUD below us. And also to the right-hand side, that alignment and how it's tying into East Charles and Tangtown, again, that's kind of what's projected, but we're leaving that space alone in the event they need to make modifications. And when I say they, I mean DOT. But that is potentially subject to change. But that's kind of what we're holding to as far as our alignment in our design. We do have some flexibility to modify if DOT needs to. And you can see as far as the double-sided sidewalk, the sidewalk to the south is the meandering sidewalk that was requested by the town, and we went ahead and went forward and moved those, or put that into place. Railroad to the right, to the left, I want to point out that that connection piece, we do not have ownership of that piece of land. So we will be completely dependent on that coming to fruition for our project to even happen, if you will. I think that's all I can speak to on this. Donna, is there anything you wanted to add on this one?
No, I think you've got it.
Okay.
All right, going from the flat 2-dimensional site plan, in this next slide, we're bringing that streetscape to life and providing a visual of the townhomes, the 3-story townhomes you see in the foreground. In the background, you can see the 2-story homes, and just to really get a feel for how the 2- and 3-story homes mesh and are blended together so that there's they're blended together so that there's not an obvious change or feel in the 2 different product types. You can get a feel for the streetscape, the trees that will line the street. You can see the on-street parking, if that is allowed, will be provided. The landscaping. And so this dimension just gives you a real feel for the massing on that streetscape. Right, next we'll go into the two different home types. The first is the 3-story townhome. It features 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and it's approximately 1,300 square feet. It does have a 1-car garage, and there are 64 units of this type of home. This is the townhome that will be for sale. The exteriors are characterized by fiber cement siding. There's a mix of board and batten siding and horizontal siding. We've incorporated brick into the elevations. There's a 1- and 2-story building with brick on it, and then a couple of the other townhomes will be mixed in with varying levels of brick as well, primarily in the form of a water table. We've added porches. There's a variety of different types of porches and porch sizes. You can see some porches are supported by the columns, others are supported by brackets, just to provide that visual interest. You can also see in this perspective the jogging of the buildings and how they move in and out and flow, providing that articulation that breaks up that porch roof line. You can also see the projections in the front facade. on a few of the units. Again, just providing some visual interest and some differentiation between the individual units. There's also a variety of roof styles with gables and with added dormers as well. Again, we'll go into, this is the 2-story townhome. The design is very similar with the same types of features using the fiber cement siding, a mix of the board and batten and horizontal siding, similar style porches and roof styles. This 2-story home is a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhome. It's approximately just over 1,200 square feet. This building does not have a garage, so on-street parking, utilizing the parking pad at the rear of the home, as well as the additional parking spaces that were provided behind each building. And these are the designated 11 units that will be used as part of the affordable housing program. So these 11 units will be owned and managed by Dream Key Partners. Dream Key Partners was formerly known as the Charlotte Mecklenburg Housing Partnership. It has a long history with the within Mecklenburg County. It is their mission to build affordable housing for those in need. They'll be providing these units for households up to 60% of the area median income. We estimate that a typical rent for this type of unit may be $1,100. But based on that AMI at 60%, that maximum rent is $1,300. These townhomes will be permanently affordable as rentals for the life of the building. And generally, we would estimate these buildings to be usable for 80 to 100 years. And it's important to note that these townhomes are built to the same standards as the for sale units. There's no difference in the quality of materials, the types of materials, or the specifications that are being used. And that these will also be subject to the homeowners association as well. That is our project. If you've got any questions, I'd be happy, I or Keith would be happy to answer those.
Thank you so much. Tom, I think you're raising your hand.
Right. So 2 questions. First, subject to the HOA, I assume means subject to their regulations and not anything to do with, as previously said, nothing, no financial subject to the HOA. Is that correct?
The buildings is subject to the same homeowners association covenants and restrictions. So as far as maintenance, they're required to be maintained or will be maintained the same as the for sale units.
Right, so no assessments.
There will be an assessment, but that assessment is borne by
Dream Key.
By Dream Key. That is not incorporated into the rent. You remember those rents are mandated by the federal housing guidelines.
Okay. My second question is that I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. It was mentioned that these units are not going to be sold. So presumably the developer is still going to own these, but Dream Key is managing them?
I think that, let me clarify that. They are being sold
at cost.
to Dream Key at cost.
Okay.
And they will and manages. They will not go out onto the retail market.
Correct. Okay. Yes. We will not have any ownership on them. And thus no control.
Right.
I see. Carrie?
Just real quick clarification. For the 2-story townhomes that will not have garage parking, how many parking spots per unit are allocated?
We have provided 2 per unit.
Yep.
2 per unit. And what about those that have a 1-car garage? Is there a second spot for them as well, or just the drive area?
There is a space in the garage as well as a space, a parking pad behind the unit.
So the pad, though, is not marked as parking. It'll just be the drive pad. Is that correct?
It would be, but it would be, the parking pad area would be delineated from the drive aisle by concrete versus asphalt.
Understood. It won't be marked, but there'll be adequate space between the door and the street to put another vehicle as necessary.
Yes, that's correct.
All right.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we are actually, we're beyond the town of Matthews minimum standard for providing parking overall.
Any other questions from the board?
I have just one other one, and that is, can you speak to whether or not any of these are private roads currently, will be maintained internally by the HOA? There'll be public access. Is there a mix?
Great question. Can we bring the site plan back up, please? Obviously, Greylock Ridge extension will be a public road, and no question to that. Yeah. Selma Burke to the north will be public, because that's a continuation of a public road into a public road. Selma Burke to the south leads into a private road, so that portion, which is relatively small, will be private. And then to the north, that's also public to public, and then to the southeast, that would be private to private. And then the alleys behind the units will be private and maintained by the HOA.
My last question about those, the roads today, what connectivity exists or will exist when you begin the project? You mentioned that you may not be able to even proceed with this if certain conditions don't resolve themselves as far as connectivity goes. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, so we've been working with the town of Matthews and DOT on the timing of this, and actually with Lat Purser. He's the one that has the 63 acres to the south of us. So amongst all of us, we're just collaborating, coordinating, and just watching for timing. Right now, I think the projection is 2024 for completion, and the design phase is on the cusp of beginning. So it's all dependent on that. So as an example, if we got rezoned today or at the council, we would still have to wait for that development. You know, we can't get ahead of the road, basically. We could probably we could go concurrently, and ideally, you know, we don't want to drag it out because, you know, we would own the asset and that would just be sitting on our books. So.
Well, and one of the reasons for the question is just emergency vehicle access, you know, fire and so forth. Do we have multiple ingress and egresses? Do we have, you know, at any one point in time, safety is a concern. You'd obviously need to meet those types of requirements before you can move forward.
Yes, correct. And we would still have to go through the site plan process where the fire department would have any say on those movements. But we did look at that preliminarily just to make sure that, you know, truck radiuses and things of that nature would work.
Thank you. Are there any other, Mike Rowan?
So this is, at this point though, we're not, if the state was to build it, it's not a through street, it's a stub street. So the state's going to build a street with no connectivity to Monroe Road, John Street.
Oh no, they will. Yeah, it's a through. It's through and through. We just, as property owners, we just don't have ownership of the piece below. That's all.
I was looking at that part where it says Greylock Ridge extension to be built by others. Is that just talking about the state?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. One of the questions I had, and this is a little bit in terms of the housing, have you looked at any sort of sustainable measures to make these houses maybe cheaper in the long run for residents? So that, which might help with some of Carrie's questions in terms of how to make them more affordable in the long run once they're actually in the space and their utility bills wouldn't be so high. Have you looked at any of the standards like Passive House or anything like that?
That is not a space that we generally get into. With townhomes, I think it's very challenging to really get into that. I mean, I can't speak to it. I'm not an expert in that field, to be honest with you. But I can tell you, just the mere fact of them being townhouses with shared walls, you kind of have a de facto savings, you know, just from energy bills.
Sure. That makes sense.
And I will add to that. Our business model is to provide affordable housing at even a market rate. And so that has been that's been our success in the Charlotte area. So we've already established and built systems in order to provide the best value to the future homeowner. In addition to that, all of our homes are HERS certified. So we've met those certification requirements on energy savings.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from the board at this time? I apologize, I can't see everyone. There we go. Okay, would anyone like to make a motion?
Anyone?
Come on, guys.
I'll do it.
Yeah,
I'll stumble my way through it. Okay. I'd like to recommend approval for zoning motion 2020-728. Is that the right one we're on? Right? Am I ahead of the game? Is that right? Yeah. For the requested zoning actions most currently amended, it is recommended for approval and has been found to be consistent with the Matthews land use plan as follows. As consistent, the RVS Conditional Zoning District is meant to have a flexible design standards to allow for a variety of housing types. Allowing private streets contributes to this flexibility, and it is reasonable. The text amendment is reasonable because private streets are permitted in other residential zoning districts.
You need to go back.
Oh, did I ring the wrong one?
727.
Okay. See, I told you I'd stumble my way through this one.
You did great. Would
Did
anyone
great
like
on
a
that.
second?
728. You guys are like, what? Okay, let's try it again. I would recommend approval for 2020-727. As most currently amended, it is recommended for approval and has been found to be consistent with the Matthews land use plan as follows. It's consistent. The rezoning is consistent with the land use plan because it will provide a variety of housing styles, densities, and locations and encourage design and construction of alternative style housing and in development. And it's reasonable that it provides for a transitional land use between an approved mixed-use project and single-family zone. That one.
Perfect. Anyone like to second? Tom is seconding. Okay. Mike Rowan?
Yes.
Tom Dorsey?
Yes.
Jim Johnson?
Yes.
Jonathan Clayton?
Yes.
Carrie Lampson?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. That is unanimous decision. Unanimous. I said unanimous. Unanimous decision for approval. Thank you so much for coming tonight, guys.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. We look forward to building this for you guys in Matthews.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, let's move on to zoning application 2021-728, private streets text, to change the text of the UDO to allow private streets within the RVS zoning district only.
Okay, great, thank you. Again, this is another text amendment, and I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So currently in the RVS, Residential Varied Style Zoning District, all streets must be dedicated to the public, except alleyways. And gated streets are prohibited. Again, this is somewhat of a flexibility standard. We are interested in permitting, or the text amendment is to permit private streets in the RVS, built to public street standards, of course. That allows development to maintain control of the road network instead of the town having responsibility for maintenance. Many of the neighborhoods that are zoned RVS are small and do not have large or complex street network, and can be a burden on the town to maintain those small extra neighborhood streets. On the other hand, when private streets fall into disrepair, residents may petition the town to take them over because of lack of maybe because of a lack of an effective HOA or other reasons. That's but there is a process that the town has to go through and can assess property owners to bring the street up to town standards before we would take it over. The proposed text amendment is as follows. Private streets may be permitted in the RVS district. Gated streets are prohibited. Alleys are allowed and may be made private. Some of the issues that were raised during the public hearing was concern over the potential of private streets falling into disrepair. And there was also discussion about including the option for private streets in the flexible design standards section of the UDO. At this time, staff recommends allowing the option of private streets in the RVS zoning district to permit flexibility and for the town and future developments. Okay, that's my consistency statement. I am happy to take any questions that the board may have at this time. The applicants are also here. And yeah.
Thank you, Rob. Tom?
So I just have a question. That first one was says private streets may be permitted, gated streets are prohibited. Can you have a private street within the development that is gated?
No, not in RVS. Gated streets.
Gated would be out whether it's private or.
That's
so
correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. We wanted to maintain the prohibition on gated streets in the RVS zoning district, whether they were private or public.
Okay. Carrie?
Do we have any precedent where we set a condition that might require some financial responsibility on behalf of the developer? My concern here is this, and I happen to live in a community that had the problem where we paid for our street because the developer didn't. I could see where we have this wording that says private streets may be permitted, provided that the developer sets aside for the HOA a reasonable amount of funds, especially early on in this process, to go toward the ability to continue to maintain those roads. Now, I'm not saying what the amount is, but it would seem to me it would be a little bit better wording if we had this, but also conditioned the risk factor of them falling into disrepair and having HOAs that have inadequate funds to be able to repair them within some period of time before they could raise that through a dues process. It's just something I've concerned about, and it was fairly expensive, $85,000 for 20 homes to finish a road before it could be turned over. That was a slightly different situation, but again, if we had maintained it as a private road, how does a 20-home community fund the repairs of that with HOA dues without some starter from the individual or the developers who built the community? So that's a concern that I've got about allowing this process without some conditions or statements around financial responsibility.
Thank you, Carrie. I agree very much with Carrie on that statement. I think there are some concerns that I have too, is, we don't want these streets to fall apart on our residents, and making sure that they're getting, quality roads to drive on and that are safe. Are there any more comments from other members? Mike?
Did we have a situation? What was the situation recently where the town had to go back? Was that a private street or was it a public street that was not finished by the obligation of the developer?
Yes, it was the latter, Mike, and it was very similar to what occurred in our development as well. These were streets that had not been turned over to the town yet by the developers because they hadn't met the requirements. Mm-hmm. And in the particular case on Acacia, there was a public portion that connected to it that was. So that's why the town did a little bit of sharing there. But the homeowners had to foot the bill for the private portion, resurfacing and grinding to make it compliant before the town would take it.
Thank you, Carrie.
I was going to add that. Go ahead, Mike.
It was going to be directed towards you anyway. Okay. Is this where you were talking about the conditional zoning piece, is that where you were referencing that earlier?
Yeah, I mean, there are different ways. The board seemed a little bit uncomfortable with this request. I mean, it could be a flexible design standards request, private versus public. My preference is what's been proposed. I think that's the cleanest, and let staff evaluate a zoning and determine, A, there's road network we'd like to see here, there's connectivity opportunities, or B, this is a dead end kind of one-off. There's no way that there's going to be a public street network, and it really doesn't make sense for us to maintain, a 270-foot long street to nowhere, which we have in some small infill developments. Now, I was going to add that the issue we've had about streets recently were roads that were planned to be public that were abandoned by developers, and it's created further pressure on the town that the General Assembly's greatly reduced the amount of bonds that are available for municipalities. So, we were sort of left holding the bag, so to speak, and had to work with the neighbors on these streets to create an assessment for each property owner. And Carrie, that's something very well, obviously, how that process played out. And Tom, I know you had some questions for me about private streets. I know your neighborhood has private streets. Do you? And if you don't mind, if I put you on the spot, do you all set aside money for future street paving? Is there like a rainy day fund, or is it like that's 20 years down the road and nobody really thinks about it in the budget?
We'd very much like to give the whole thing over to the town. If you could give us a quick way to do that. But,
okay.
But no, we have a combination of alleys and streets. And today we reseal each of those every 5 years on a staggered basis. So we've got, as a matter of fact, April 7th and 8th, you want to come by, we're going to repave about a little bit more than half at a cost of $20,000. We'll move on. We may be doing it more. We have to, but we included, not to go into too much detail, we have a reserve fund, and we continue to fund the reserve fund, and that is one of the things we use money for. But something else that you were talking about developers not performing. I wasn't here, but when the development was first built, the builder did go into bankruptcy. He did not finish the roads. He forfeited his bond, and the county did finish the roads. Into it. Am I?
Yes, Rob, is the petitioner? You said the petitioner is here, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, they are here.
Are there any questions that the board has for the petitioners at this time? Okay. Mike, Ron, do you still have a question, or are you keeping that hand raised? Yeah. Just want to make sure you didn't have any other. Carrie.
I just want to make one other comment, and that is, again, I understand, and my only concern is the risk for homeowners in a neighborhood that has private streets. And oftentimes, the CC&Rs of that association don't call out specifically the risks and the responsibilities of private streets and alleys to the homeowners who will begin to inherit that responsibility when the development gets turned over. So even if it isn't something that we list in the code, I'd love to see some statements that would require HOA covenants to include the reference that these are in fact private alleys and streets and will be the responsibility of all homeowners, as standard language paragraphs that are in CC&Rs that include these types of streets. Is that possible? Just some way that and I can tell you, running our homeowners association, probably of the 20 homeowners, 18 have never read the CC&Rs. So it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but at least it gives the HOA and the board of HOA management, who are typically townhome owners or private management firms, some insight into the responsibilities that they have as early as possible. Not that it may drive a condition of whether a homeowner buys a property in some place that they know may in fact have a slightly higher HOA due structure to it because of roads that a normal community would not. So those are the kinds of concerns, and I'm just searching for ways that we can highlight this if it were to be approved as part of an RVS development?
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Gary.
Not to, hopefully not digressing, but maybe expand on what Kerry is saying. And in our particular development, we've got 114 townhome units, and we only have one water meter for the development. So everybody's water is included in their HOA dues. And that's fine, except that someplace along the line, we also then own all of the water and sewer lines within the development. So anything, so the roads are a minor part of what we have to deal with. Any water breaks or pavement, excavation, or et cetera, become part of the HOA responsibility. I'm not sure that everybody really has an awareness up front.
Well, and I'll complicate that even further. In our community, while the road was private, we paid for Duke Energy's lights and energy bill for the 8 street lights in our neighborhood, which was $400 a month.
Yeah, we do that too, and rent the street lights. That's a common.
Not referenced anywhere in the HOA as to the responsibilities that will be borne by the property owners.
Yeah, that's a, if I can, that's a common. Some of you may have run into this. That's a common ploy, if you will, of developers for whether it's an industrial development or commercial, what have you, is to not include the cost of that in the development to get Duke to provide it, and the ultimate homeowners or the owners are renting that.
So to go back to Carrie's question about putting it in the, in the covenants of the HOA, Jay, do we have any possibility to do that? Or Rob, is that something that we can make a recommendation, or if that's something, what can we do on our end as part of a recommendation? If that's something, if that's the will of the board to do something like that.
So I see Craig shaking his head. This is just a text amendment. So anything particular to the zoning would need to be discussed independently. And,
okay.
Craig, could a developer in theory consent that they would create an HOA structure where money would be set aside for road maintenance?
We don't really get into restrictions and covenants.
Mm-hmm.
That's an area we don't get into. So the answer is no.
Worth asking.
Yeah.
And if that is not in our purview, the only way we can control or to keep that from occurring is to not allow private streets in RVS. Is that a fair statement?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, we have to think about this too every time you buy and sell a home, especially if you're doing it with a realtor, you have to sign a residential property disclosure form, which very clearly states on there, are the roads public, are they private? Then there's about a 15-line checklist items of what the HOAs are paying for. They're not paying attention to the form that everyone has to sign, both buyers, sellers, and real estate agents as well. Well, no, real estate agents do not sign it. Sorry, buyers and sellers. So in the other neighborhoods that we've done, every time we sell a home, there's a capital contribution fee of $500 that is tacked onto a seller's closing costs, and that goes on for the life of the neighborhood, and that goes towards the kitty of in 20 years or 25 years or however many years it is down the road, that there is money left to set aside to repave the road. So that's how we've done it in the past. So saying that, I disagree with saying that it's not, the buyer isn't aware, especially because, we use standard North Carolina offer to purchase contracts and all of the realtor approved forms. And it's very clearly on multiple spots on all those forms. So just wanted to kind of point that out too.
Well, and I appreciate that what you're doing and what you're proposing for your communities is exactly what needs to be done. My reference about them not reading this or understanding it is that even the contracts that we sign stated as of today. It never estimates that in 5 years that $500 may have to be $1,000 given cost increases of maintenance and so on. And you understand that as the developer, I'm speaking from the standpoint of the HOA and its responsibilities and the homeowners. I think if they're well funded, private streets are fine. My concern is the gap and not having, it's just like, we have a lot of disclosure statements when you buy a house and you take a mortgage. And one of those is, hey, this is what you're going to pay over 30 years. We don't do those kinds of things for privately owned assets inside of the HOA. And it's incumbent on us to put statements together and to show forward-looking statements. But I would suggest that most HOAs aren't looking 5 years out or 10 years out in terms of those cost projections. That's all. And again, I appreciate that a capital fund or something like that, voluntarily done by a developer, is exactly what I was, I'm just trying to find a way to see if when we put something together as a town, we can encourage that kind of behavior. I'm not trying to assess them, or I'm not trying to state amounts, but to make sure that everyone involved knows what they're about to set up the homeowners for if these are private roads that need that maintenance. That's all. Appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments at this time? Okay, see none. Then would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. Although
Okay.
I think Jonathan already tried to do this one. If we approve 2020-728, because it's the requested zoning action as it's currently amended, has been found to be consistent with the Matthews land use plan as follows. It's the conditional zoning district is meant to have flexible design standards to allow for a variety of housing types. Allowing private streets contributes to this flexibility, and it's reasonable because private streets are permitted in other residential zoning districts.
Thank you, Tom. Do we have a second? My cat. I don't know if you can hear him in the background. Do you have a second?
My first motion is going down.
I'll second you, Tom. There you go. Okay. Mike Rowan,
Yes.
Tom Dorsey,
Yes.
Jim Johnson,
Yes.
Jonathan Clayton,
Yes.
and Carrie Lampson.
Again, as a text amendment, I have to say no.
Okay. And I said yes. So that is, what are we, 5-1 tonight? Is that correct? 5-1
Correct.
for recommendation. Thank you. Okay. I think we're now to the planning board new member interviews.
So I can be very brief about this. Well, first, if she will turn her camera on, I wanted to introduce our new senior planner who cannot speak with you tonight because her audio is not working. I guess somehow the way she joined, I'm not sure she can speak, but this is Nadine Bennett. She is our new senior planner. This is week 3. We can, wave, thumbs up, thumbs down, we can do hand gestures, but I don't think we can use the chat box like we can some meetings, but we're happy to have her here in Matthews, and I know she's going to do great work for the town, and she'll be bringing things before you in the coming months. So wish her a warm welcome.
Yeah. Welcome, Nadine.
Welcome.
Have you here.
Yeah. So the weird ways you get to meet people during the pandemic, right?
Right.
Jay, where's she from?
I don't have her bio. I would probably screw it up.
No, that's fine.
I can tell you Jay's bio. I had to memorize that last week. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nadine's been in Charlotte for a long time. She spent a lot of time with the COG, many years there, and worked for some consulting firms recently. And like I said, I'm not doing it justice at all. She has a great bio, and we'll let her tell you more about herself the next time we meet.
Great.
Okay, so we have applications in. We've got 2 vacancies on planning board right now. The last go around, we had a small group of you that conducted some interviews. Carrie's video is off. So I know Carrie and David Weezer. I guess that was 2 years ago now. So it's been a little while.
It was actually chair and vice chair. I'm here. I apologize. I turned this off so I don't run out of battery before we do.
Okay, well, I'll try to be fast. So I'm assuming Mike would like to participate, but if there are one or two additional folks that might be interested in kind of getting to know some of the applicants as we begin to go through the pile of applications, you can let us know now or send Shayna or I an email if you're interested. I'm assuming it'll be a Zoom call, unlike our in-person meetings a few years ago.
I'd be interested, Jay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'll be great.
Awesome.
So we'll look forward to seeing some new faces here in the coming months.
So you said you already got some applications in. Is that what you said?
We do. I think we have, I don't know.
Wow, 10.
There you go.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
That's great. That's great to have people wanting to be involved.
Do they know how much y'all pay?
So I did just get a text, and I'm just gonna say this. I did miss the most important thing about Nadine is, by technicality, she has worked for the town not longer than me, but before me. So she worked for Matthews between 1998 and 2000. Are those dates? So yeah, prior to my tenure here, which is pretty cool. So we're happy to have her back. All right.
Okay. Well, are there any other questions or comments tonight? Otherwise, we can wrap this up for the evening.
It's too early to adjourn, isn't it?
Never, Tom. Never.
Council went to 11 p.m. last night, so be happy that you got to have the night off, everyone.
Right. Would someone like to make the motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Okay.
I'll second him.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Let's start with Mike Rowan, right back at you.
Yes.
Tom Dorsey.
Yes.
Jim Johnson.
Yes.
Jonathan Clayton.
Yes.
Carrie Lampson.
Has anyone ever said the opposite? Yes.
No. That's a good question. I say yes as well. So we're adjourned, but thanks guys.
Good job.
Thanks.
Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.